Someone asked me to drop a new rendering tutorial, and they called me Pookie, and that's all you need to do to get me going. Please don't spam Pookie in the comments. You know, Pookie means something else in Indonesia. It's pussycat without the cat. Anyway, so the first thing to do is, of course, prepare your sketch. I usually draw a cleaner sketch on top of the rough one because my rough sketch doesn't look like anything. So, what does sketching have to do with rendering? Well, nothing. It's completely optional. There are some gigachats out there who can render from literally blobs of color. But to make my life easier, I will stick with sketching. I tried rendering without a sketch once. It gave me nightmares. By the way, does this hand look yaoi enough to you? Now you can't render without the base color, but it's such a tedious process, so we're just gonna fast forward. I add all the base colors in one layer because I'm not an organized person and my brain gets overwhelmed with too many layers. I don't wanna burn my brain before we even start rendering. Anyway, I start with muted colors first because they're easier to control and not hurt my old aging retinas. Same reason why I always use gray backgrounds, because white burns my eyes. I followed the reference, but I also ran the airbrush across the middle of the face for that cute blushing maiden look. Even though I'm currently drawing a strong man with gluteus muscle thick enough to play bongos on, I'm sure he blushes from time to time. By the way, in case it's not obvious enough, even though I call this a rendering tutorial, actually just how I usually do it, in my own style. Lately, we've been exploring Xiaohongshu a lot on this channel, and there are some changes in my rendering method and art style, and I wanna share it with you guys. I'm switching to flat watercolor opaque to apply the hard shadows. I always start with the darkest areas on the skin since it has big shapes and are easiest to see. I shade it flatly at first, like cell shading, focusing on the big shapes. Generally, the skin shading contains many triangles, for example on the eyes, nose, under the lips, under the chin, and also the neck. Afterwards, I started adding the midtones, or the middle shadow, or whatever you want to call it. They're lighter, softer shadows that help add volume and dimension so the painting looks more 3D. You'll find them on the cheekbones, forehead, and nose bridge. I am still using the flat watercolor opaque to do this, but with an even lower opacity. The beauty of this brush is the faded tip, so you can get both soft and hard edges with just one brush. You just have to adjust the opacity and the pen pressure on your screen. By the way, for the shadows, I'm using a multiply layer for both soft and hard shadows. Multiply makes any color darker and a bit more saturated, which is why I always use muted colors with a hint of red. I always spend too much time working on the skin that I don't even take the hair and clothes shading seriously. Yes, I know, this is supposed to be a rendering video, but I yap about these other things. But these are the foundation of the painting before we paint over the sketch and refine it. Also, imagine if I started the video with this half-painted Risley on the canvas. People would start asking questions like, how did it get to that? Or, why did you skip so many steps? And blah blah blah. Okay, maybe I'm thinking too much. Now we can paint over the sketch. Yay, we're finally rendering. I have merged all my layers after I duplicated them, of course, not taking any chances. And this is just a habit of mine. I always start with rendering the nose first. I don't know why. Some people work from top to bottom or rendering the painting as a whole, but I always start with the nose. If I don't get the nose right, I can't work on anything else. Pay attention to the midtones as you paint. A lot of beginners aren't very confident in adding midtones because they can look too dark or the colors don't blend well. Now there are two methods I use for midtones. First, using a low opacity brush to apply the midtones and increase it gradually. Second, still with a low opacity brush, swipe the dark color onto the base and take the resulting color as the midtone. Don't forget to combine it with dark shadows for more dimension and volume. You can use smudge or blur tool to blend, but I prefer using low opacity brush so I can maintain that painterly texture. Sometimes I do use smudge for bigger areas like the cheek for a smoother blend. Recently, I'm trying to be quicker when rendering hair, not necessarily to save time, but to keep myself from overthinking. All I have to keep in mind is make a Hyundai logo as I'm rendering and use a big brush so I don't overthink the details. I will still add details, but not right now. So I got a lot of questions on how to paint over the sketch. And like, isn't that pretty self-explanatory? You paint over the sketch. Okay, but seriously though, I think what they meant was how to do that without the painting losing its definition. I do paint over my sketch, but I redraw my sketch afterwards and make it tidier. I do this especially to the face, so the facial features don't lose definition. But I suggest avoiding using pure black for this because it might look unnatural. A Chinese artist on Xiaohongshu called Black Sister is one of the giga chats who renders without a sketch. On their tutorial, they sometimes add these arrows and shapes, and that confused the crap out of me. But I think I figured it out because I used it for this Risley painting. And okay, let me explain it by using the lips, okay, because I just got it when I was rendering the lips. So the idea is to give a 3D look to the painting, so we should see the lips like this, like a 3D topology or something, which looks complicated, but bear with me a little. By knowing how it folds, it's easier to shape the shadows, where to make it darker, and how the shadow gradually gets lighter. It takes some practice to get your brain used to seeing the drawing as 3D objects, but that's fine. Always have a reference ready because it helps so much. I recommend looking for black and white photos because they normally have a good light and shadow contrast, so it's easier to map out the big shapes of shadow. Let's get back to the hair for a bit. I focused on building the big shapes before, but now the hair is losing its definition, which is normal. Do not hesitate to redraw the hair or even add some line art. I like sharp looking hair with clear texture, and since Ryo has dark hair, I used pure black to redraw the hair. By the way, if you're rendering in one layer like me, always work from the bottom to the top. For example, his eyes and eyebrows are covered with bangs, so draw the full eyes and eyebrows first, then paint the bangs. Also, don't forget to zoom out. I'm zooming in and out many times in my painting to check if anything's out of place, because we can get too consumed in rendering and blending, and then boom, the eyes are in different postal codes. I'm not gonna go into much details about rendering close because I don't know what I'm doing either, and it's gonna get covered by the hand anyway, so why bother, right? I'll render it just enough that it doesn't look weird. For the hand, I'm going to use the method from Black Sister like before, so the hand looks more realistic and 3D. It's very important to get the anatomy right before rendering, which I didn't do. I just sketched it, following the reference. It looks fine from way far away, and then I jumped straight into coloring. And now I pay the price. Same with the hair, do not hesitate to redraw it if you think it looks weird. Thankfully, I drew the hand on a different layer so it's easier to fix. I also decided to be bolder with my brush strokes. I use high opacity brush more and blend less to get that oil painting look. I also line art the hand to quickly draw details like the nails and knuckles. The painting's 80% done, so now I'm adding small details like the eyelashes, tear ducts, highlights, and small shadows from the hair tips. Don't forget to add shadow coming from the hand. I use multiply layer on top of the original painting so it won't mess with all my hard work. Now we go to filter, click hue and saturation, and adjust the colors and saturation to your liking. I also use brightness and contrast to adjust the brightness and contrast. Turn your painting into grayscale to see if it has good contrast. If you can't see the shadows clearly, then you need to up the contrast, muchacho. With an overlay layer, I'm adding more red to the painting. This is optional, or you can use any color you like. I love red, and I like seeing Ryo blush. It's like he's drunk from drinking all that tea, or constipated from the tea. Lately, I love using the hidden colors method Chinese artists use. I have a dedicated video on that, so check that out. But basically, we're adding color variation without ruining the contrast. If you've seen artists adding blue or purple to the skin and it makes the drawing look more interesting, this is basically that. To do so, you need to pick a shade of blue or purple that has similar value with the shadow. If the shadow is dark, don't apply light colors on top of it because they have different values. I applied it the same way I made midtone so it looks natural. If you forgot how it's done, jump back a couple of minutes, you forgetful little I like to apply these hidden colors on the shadow so they don't look too strong. Here's another way to do it on Procreate. Duplicate layer, open curves, act like a crazy person, change the blending mode to color, lower the opacity, and erase the colors on the face. Boom, now you have pink and green on the skin as well. Lastly, I use the Unsharp Mask filter on Ibispaint to sharpen the painting. Yes, the name's quite ironic. Why would you name it ironically like that? Couldn't you just name it Sharp Mask? I don't think anyone's gonna complain if you name it Sharp Mask. I mean, it's raising a lot of questions because you name it Unsharp Mask. Is it like an inside joke among developers or... Alright, I'm just gonna end the video here before I spiral into whatever that was. Sorry about that, my melatonin pills just kicked in. Okay, good night.